Silas Boone had never paid much mind to chickens. He kept a dozen of them for eggs and didn't expect much else. They weren't clever like horses or useful like cattle, and they sure as hell didn't make for good company. But they clucked, scratched, and pecked their way through the dusty corners of his ranch like they had every right to be there, which, he figured, they did. His ranch, Boone's Rest, sat about 4 miles outside the town of Bitterbrush. It wasn't much, just a leaning house, a battered red barn, and a few crooked fences that barely held together. Silas wasn't rich, and he sure wasn't young anymore. 42 years old, widowed for 6, and with no children to speak of. He got by on odd work, bartering, and the occasional trade in town. Mostly he kept to himself, but lately, something strange had caught his eye. Each morning, just after sunrise, and again at dusk, his chickens, led by a feisty brown hen he called Maud, would wander over to a dry, unused patch of ground behind the barn. They would walk in small circles, not random clucking and scratching like usual, but deliberate loops always in the same spot. Then they'd stand still for a moment, peck a few times, and walk away. It wasn't just once. It was every day, like clockwork. At first, Silas ignored it. Chickens were odd creatures. But by the 4th morning, he found himself watching from the porch, arms folded, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. "They're up to something," he muttered. He walked over after they left and knelt down. The ground there was dry, hard-packed dirt. No different from the rest of the yard. He ran his fingers through the dust. Nothing. But the 5th day, he brought a shovel. He waited until dusk, when Maud and her sisters finished their strange ritual. Then he stepped out, shovel in hand, and began to dig. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe an old root, maybe a rat's nest. But about 2 feet down, his shovel hit something solid wood. Old, rotted, and damp. What the hell? He cleared more dirt. The wood gave way to rusted metal hinges. A trapdoor. Silas stood there for a long moment, hands on hips, heart beginning to thud harder in his chest. He hadn't known about any cellar. No one had mentioned it when he bought the land. Crouching down, he gripped the rusted iron ring and pulled. He groaned loudly as it opened, revealing a hole so dark it seemed to swallow the light. He fetched a lantern from the barn. Lowering it into the hole, he saw a narrow wooden ladder descending into what looked like an earthen chamber. The air that rose up smelt damp and old, like mold and forgotten things. He descended slowly, each rung groaning beneath his boots. When he reached the bottom, he saw what looked like a storage cellar, dirt floor, timber walls, and an old barrel in the corner. Broken crates littered the edges. But what made him freeze was the figure huddled in the far corner. A child. A boy, no older than 7 or 8. His clothes were filthy rags, his feet bare and cut, his hair hung in matted clumps, and his eyes wide and terrified reflected the lantern light. The boy didn't speak. He pressed back into the corner like a cornered animal. Silas held up his free hand. "Easy now. I ain't here to hurt you." No answer. He set the lantern on the ground and knelt slowly. "Name's Silas. You live down here?" Still no answer. The boy's arms wrapped tightly around his knees. Silas could see bruises along the boy's wrists, old and new. There was a scratch across his cheek. His ribs were showing through his shirt. "Jesus," Silas muttered under his breath. He removed his coat and held it out. The boy didn't take it. "All right," Silas said gently. "How about I just leave this here for you, and some bread, and I'll come back in the morning." He left a chunk of bread from his saddlebag and a canteen of water. Then, slowly, he backed up the ladder and closed the trapdoor. That night, Silas didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling for hours, the lantern still lit by his bedside, casting long shadows across the walls. Questions spun through his mind. Who was the boy? How long had he been down there? And who the hell had put him there? When morning finally came, he brought a blanket, more food, and a clean shirt. The chickens had returned to their spot, clucking and circling, but he ignored them this time. The trapdoor creaked open. He lowered the lantern again. The boy was still there, but he had eaten. The bread was gone, the canteen half empty. Silas sat on the bottom rung. "I brought you some more food and a shirt." This time, the boy didn't flinch as much. He watched silently as Silas placed the items down. "Still not gonna talk?" Silas asked softly, a shake of the head. "Well, that's all right. I'll talk enough for both of us." He told the boy about the ranch, about Maud the hen, and how she was probably smarter than half the men in Bitterbrush, about how the well pump always stuck in the summer, about the one-eyed mule he used to have. Eventually, he said, "I can't just leave you down here, son." The boy's head snapped up in panic. No, Silas said quickly. "I ain't gonna send you away. I'm just saying a boy needs sun, fresh air, not a hole in the ground." The boy's lips parted just slightly. Then he looked down. Silas took that as progress. He returned every day, brought food, sat and talked, waited, and after nearly a week, the boy finally followed him up the ladder. He blinked at the daylight like he hadn't seen it in a long time. Silas handed him the coat again, and this time, the boy took it. The chickens watched curiously. "Bet you Maud was the one who noticed you first," Silas said. "Led me straight to you." The boy still hadn't given his name. That night, Silas gave him a cot in the barn, near the warmth of the old stove. He stayed up late, whittling a small wooden horse, just something to hold. In town, Silas kept his mouth shut. Bitterbrush folk were friendly enough on the surface, but they had a way of twisting things behind your back, especially when it came to oddities. But he did ask around quietly. Any news of a missing boy? Any newcomers acting strange? No one knew anything, or at least no one said. One night, a wagon passed by his ranch well after dark. Didn't stop, didn't linger, but Silas saw it from the porch. 2 men. One had a long scar down his neck. The wagon bore no mark. He felt a chill deeper than the autumn air. Inside the barn, the boy was sleeping, clutching the wooden horse. A small sound escaped him, a whimper, a nightmare. Silas sat down beside him. "Don't worry, kid. Whoever put you down there, they ain't getting you back. Not if I've got a say." He didn't know what trouble was coming, but he knew one thing for certain. The chickens had led him to something worth protecting. The next morning, Silas was up before the rooster crowed. He brewed coffee on the old stove, letting the warm steam rise into the cool air of the kitchen. For the first time in a long while, he set out 2 tin cups. The boy hadn't said a word yet, but Silas figured company didn't need to talk to be welcome. The barn was still, save for the occasional rustle of hay. Silas pushed open the door slowly. The boy, still without a name, was curled up on the cot, wrapped in the old quilt Silas had brought out the night before. One arm hung over the side, still clutching the wooden horse. Silas placed the second mug of coffee, more milk and sugar than coffee, really on the stool beside the cot. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Silas let him rest. Lord knew he'd probably been sleeping with one eye open for months, maybe longer. He spent the morning tending the animals. Maud and the hens clucked excitedly, pecking at the feed Silas scattered. He kept glancing back at the barn, half expecting the boy to bolt or disappear. But when he came back an hour later, the boy was sitting on the cot, sipping cautiously from the tin cup. Silas smiled. You like that? Just a splash of coffee in there to make you feel like a man. The boy didn't smile, but he gave a small nod. Silas crouched down beside him. You got a name, son. A long pause. Then, barely above a whisper. Wren. Silas blinked. Wren? Like the bird? Another nod. Well, I'll be. That's a fine name. Fits you. Wren stared at him, cautious. Then, is it okay if I stay? Silas's chest tightened. He nodded slowly. As long as you want. Wren's eyes dropped, as if unsure how to accept that. That day passed quietly. Silas taught Wren how to scatter feed, how to brush down the old mule, and how to pump water from the stubborn well. The boy was attentive, eager to help, and though he flinched at sudden movements, his hands were steady. Someone taught you hard, huh? Silas asked once, watching him scrub a feed bucket with precision. Wren didn't answer, just kept scrubbing. By evening, they sat on the porch steps. The sky glowed with burnt orange and dusky purple. Wren kept fiddling with the wooden horse. Silas glanced down. You sleep all right last night? A shrug. Bad dreams? Wren nodded. Silas leaned back, folding his arms. I used to get 'em too, after the war, and after my wife passed. What helps? Wren asked softly. Talkin', mostly, or sittin' with someone who won't judge you. They sat in silence after that, but it was a quiet kind of comfort. That night, around midnight, Silas woke suddenly. Something had stirred him, he couldn't say what. He slipped on his boots and grabbed the rifle from beside the door. The ranch was wrapped in silence, but something felt off. He moved toward the barn, footsteps crunching lightly in the gravel. Inside, he found Wren wide awake, sitting upright in bed, eyes wide. You heard it too? Silas whispered. Wren nodded. Footsteps. Silas crept to the barn door and peered out. Moonlight lit the yard faintly. He caught a glimpse of movement near the edge of the tree line. A figure, maybe two. He raised the rifle, but didn't fire. Back inside, he muttered, Keep low. They waited. Nothing else moved. Whoever it was had vanished into the trees. The next morning, Silas found fresh boot prints near the back fence. Someone had been watching them. He walked into town that afternoon. Sheriff Lennox raised a brow when Silas mentioned the visitors. Could be drifters, the sheriff said, or someone looking to scare you off your land. Happens. Silas frowned. Ain't nothing here worth stealing. Lennox leaned back. Some folks don't need a reason to do harm. Any word of missing boys? The Stry. The sheriff's expression darkened. Not around here. But up north, there were whispers last year. Children disappearing off poor farms. No proof, just rumors. Silas's gut twisted. Should I be worried? He asked. Lennox shrugged. You're a good shot, Boone. And your land's off the main road. Just keep your eyes open. Over the next few days, Silas built a false wall in the barn. Just a small space, big enough for Wren to hide in if need be. He didn't say it was for hiding, just called it a project. Wren seemed to understand anyway. The boy spoke more now. He never said much about where he came from, only that he wasn't supposed to be born, and that they made him go in the dark when he got too loud. Silas wanted to ask more, but didn't push. Instead, He taught him to ride the old mule, to cook cornbread, to whittle. They worked together, repairing a broken gate. Ren laughed once when Silas fell in the mud. It was the first laugh Silas had heard in years. That night, Silas sat on the porch with a letter in his lap. It was addressed to a name he hadn't spoken in a long time, his brother, Ephraim. He hadn't written to him since the funeral, but something told him he might need help soon. As he sealed the envelope, he saw the chickens gathering again, circling, always in the same patch. Even though Ren was safe, the birds hadn't stopped. He watched them for a long time, then muttered, "What else is buried out here?" He decided he'd dig more the next morning, just to be sure, because in Bitterbrush, nothing stayed hidden forever. Silas didn't sleep much that night. Between the prints in the dirt and the way Ren kept mumbling in his sleep, something deep in Silas's gut said this wasn't over. When the roosters crowed, he was already up, shovel in hand, heading toward the spot where the hens always circled. Ren followed quietly, wrapped in an oversized flannel shirt, his boots dragging. "You think there's something under there?" "I think animals know things we don't," Silas said. "And chickens don't just walk in circles for no reason." They stood by the patch. The ground was drier here, hard-packed. Silas dug anyway. The shovel hit resistance just 6 inches down. He dropped to his knees, brushed the dirt away. Wood. A board. Weathered, gray, splintered. Not a root cellar. Not a rock. A lid. "What is it?" Ren asked. Silas didn't answer right away. He pried the board up with the end of the shovel. A smell hit him, earth and mildew and something else, sour and old. There was a box beneath the ground, more like a crate, handmade, large enough for a child. Silas's chest tightened. His hands went still. "Go back to the porch, Ren. I want to help. Not with this." Ren hesitated, then obeyed. Silas waited until he was out of earshot before pulling up the last board. Inside, wrapped in burlap and tied with frayed rope, was a small body, bones, long decayed. Silas sat back, stunned. There was no name, no sign, no cross to mark the place. He walked back to the porch slowly. Ren was perched on the steps, arms around his knees. "There's a boy in that box," Silas said, voice hollow. Ren said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Like me?" Silas nodded. He didn't make it out. That evening, Silas dug a grave on the hill behind the barn and made a cross from 2 fence posts. He didn't know the boy's name, but he carved "Rest Now" into the wood. Ren stood beside him the whole time, holding the wooden horse. Afterward, they sat around the stove, eating stew, in silence. "You think someone buried him there so nobody'd know?" Ren asked. Silas stirred the pot. "Yeah, I think someone thought that boy didn't matter." Ren looked down. "That used to be me." Silas reached out and squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Not anymore." The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Silas kept his rifle close. Ren slept in the false wall at night. The chickens stopped circling, as if their job was done. One afternoon, Silas rode into town again. He showed Sheriff Lennox what he'd found. The sheriff removed his hat. "Lord have mercy," he muttered. "You think it's one of the missing ones?" "Can't say, but I don't think it's the only one." Lennox pursed his lips. "You think Ren's part of all this?" Silas gave him a look that could wither trees. "He's a survivor, not a suspect." "Fair enough," Lennox said. "You watch your back, Boone." "I always do." Back at the ranch, Wren had taken to carving things. He made little animals out of softwood, rabbits, birds, even a tiny chicken with its head tilted. He lined them up along the windowsill in the barn. Something to watch over us, he explained. One night, Silas woke to creaking boards on the porch. He grabbed his rifle and crept to the door. Wren was already crouched in the hallway, wooden horse in hand. They listened. Voices, low, murmuring. 2 men, maybe 3. Sure, he still got the boy. Bury the other one, I heard. Could be trouble if the law gets wind. Silas's blood froze. He kicked the door open, rifle raised. The porch was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. He stepped outside, scanned the tree line. Nothing. Stay inside, he told Wren, no matter what. That night, Silas didn't sleep. He sat in a chair by the front door, gun across his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. In the morning, he found tracks again, hoof prints. They led toward the old mining road, unused and mostly forgotten. He saddled the mule and rode out. Wren begged to come, but Silas refused. You need to stay safe. If I don't come back by nightfall, go straight to Sheriff Lennox. He followed the trail for miles. It led into the canyon, past the old mines. There, hidden behind an outcrop, was a crude shack. He approached quietly, rifle ready. Inside, he found evidence: ropes, cages, crates with straw. One still had a child's shoe inside, but no people. He kicked open a trunk. Inside were documents, names, numbers, ages, a ledger. Silas swallowed bile. He grabbed the ledger and rode hard back to town. Sheriff Lennox didn't argue. He took the ledger, sent a wire to the state marshal. This goes deep, Lennox muttered. Real deep. I'll keep Wren with me, Silas said. Ain't nobody taking him. Understood. Back at the ranch, Wren was waiting by the gate. When he saw the ledger, he froze. You found it? He whispered. Silas nodded. They won't hurt anyone else. Not if I can help it. Wren stepped forward. There were more like me. I remember. A girl named Tilly. A boy with red hair. We'll find them. Wren looked up at Silas. Promise? Silas knelt down. I promise. That night, they burned the shack in the canyon. The fire lit the sky for miles. The fire had long since died down, leaving only the scent of char and the glowing memory of everything it had consumed. Ash drifted down the canyon like snow, silent and gray. Silas and Wren stood by the embers, smoke curling around them as though the past refused to let go. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Wren, voice barely above a whisper, asked, What happens now? Silas took off his hat and held it over his heart. Now we make sure it never happens again. They returned to the ranch under a pale dawn, both exhausted but unwilling to rest. The discovery of the ledger had cracked open a door no one had dared approach for years. Sheriff Lennox had sent word east, and federal marshals were expected within days. But Silas didn't wait. He and Wren pored over the ledger. Dozens of names, ages, marks beside some, asterisks, symbols they didn't understand. We need to find the ones still alive, Wren said. Silas nodded. And the people behind this. They started with the most recent names, scouring nearby towns. Silas wrote letters, sent writers, paid visits to dusty records offices. Wren drew portraits from memory, crude, but detailed enough. The girl named Tilly, the red-haired boy, a child with a lisp. One by one, they tracked down traces. Some had been adopted, others vanished without a trail. And then, one evening, A rider arrived from the next county over, carrying a torn piece of cloth and a message. They found a boy near Dry Gulch. Said he wouldn't talk. Kept saying wooden chickens over and over. Silas saddled up. "Come on, Wren." Together, they rode out. The boy they found was 8, barefoot, and bruised. His name was Calvin. He had been hiding in an abandoned church cellar. Wren knelt before him and held out a carved chicken, smiling softly. Calvin's eyes filled with tears. He threw himself into Wren's arms. They brought him home. Within a week, 2 more children were recovered. The ledger led them, a twisted map of suffering. It was hard, sometimes hopeless work, but Wren didn't falter. Each time they rescued another child, he grew stronger, clearer. He was becoming something Silas hadn't seen in a long time hopeful. The ranch became more than a quiet patch of earth. It became a haven, a place with too many plates at dinner and laughter at dusk. Silas built bunks in the barn, added windows and warmth. He taught the kids to ride, to mend fences, to bake biscuits. He taught them safety. He taught them family. But danger still lingered. One cold morning, just as the frost was lifting, a man in a black coat rode into town. He had no name, just a seal on his letter and an expensive horse. He looked more like a banker than a lawman. He knocked on the sheriff's door, demanded the ledger, said the investigation was being moved to a higher authority. Sheriff Lennox refused, and he paid the price. That night, the jailhouse burned to the ground. The ledger was gone. Silas woke to the smoke on the wind. He knew. "Time's up," he said. He gathered the children in the barn. "They'll come looking," he told them. "Not for you because you scare them, because you remember." Wren stood beside him, taller now, more sure. Then let them come. Silas armed himself, taught the older kids how to defend the younger ones, built traps around the property, alarms made of cans and string, reinforced the false wall where they'd hidden duplicates of the ledger. They practiced drills, made emergency signals. Wren drew watch rotations, and they waited. 2 nights later, they arrived. 3 men, black coats, quiet steps, faces masked in cloth. They crept toward the porch, and the chickens, those odd, circling chickens, erupted into wild screeches. Silas was already on the roof. One shot cracked the night, then another. The men scattered. One got caught in a snare and screamed. Another fled into the woods. The third reached the barn door only to find Wren standing there with a pitchfork. "You're not taking anyone," he said. The man lunged. Wren didn't flinch. He sidestepped and jabbed the handle into the man's ribs. Silas arrived a moment later, rifle barrel smoking. The man lay unconscious at their feet. It was over by morning. Sheriff Lennox found the one who ran raving about demons in feathers. The other 2 were turned over to the marshals. The lawmen from the east arrived late, of course. All fire and outrage, but no answers. Silas handed them copies of the ledger he'd transcribed. Names, places. They couldn't bury it now. Wren made sure copies had gone to every local paper and preacher. Word spread. Justice stirred. Months passed. The wrench flourished. The scars remained, but so did the healing. Wren spoke with calm, even when talking about the box he'd been found in. Calvin built coops for the chickens. Tilly grew tomatoes. A girl named June taught them songs, and every Sunday they carved. Tiny figures lined the mantel. Chickens, cowboys, children, a carved fence, and in the center, a wooden barn. smoke rising not from fire, but from a chimney. New children came, not just rescued, but sent, by letters, by preachers, by mothers who couldn't care for them. The ranch took them in. The town changed too. Folks brought tools, offered to help. What once was whispered fear became quiet pride. One spring morning, Silas stood by the porch, watching the sun rise. Wren stepped beside him. "We made it, didn't we?" Silas nodded. "We did." The chickens walked in loose circles in the yard, not warning now, but playing. And behind them, laughter. Home.